We are building on what we looked at last lesson, where we were annotating the first half before you and mine. We're moving on to the second half of the poem and focusing particularly on the ideas and the language being used. So we're going to reread the final two stanzas. This is a kind of confusing poem. It used to be on the specification when I first started being an English teacher, and then it went away. And it was when we used to have tiers in English, it was seen as a higher paper poem. So it was a higher tier. You'd only have to answer this if you were going for high grades. So it is one of the trickier poems that we look at. I think we just need to get our head around the kind of unusual stance of the narrator. So the fact that this is a child addressing or witnessing her mom before she was born. And I think as soon as you get your head around that idea, as weird as that is, then actually it's not that complicated, it's not that difficult. So if you're not comfortable with that, go back and have a look at the stuff that we were looking at on the last PowerPoint, the last lesson, before we move on. So here we are, final two stanzas. The decade ahead of my loud, possessive yell was the best one, eh? I remember my hands in those high-heeled red shoes, relics. And now your ghost clatters towards me over George Square till I see you, clear as scent under the tree, with its lights, and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart. Cha-cha-cha. You'd teach me the steps on the way home from Mass, stamping stars from the wrong pavement. Even then, I wanted the bold girl winking in Portobello, somewhere in Scotland, before I was born. That glamorous love lasts, where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you are mine. Okay, as ever, you should be annotating your copy of the poem with the ideas from the slides. I've colour-coded it to make it simpler for you, and just try and get down as much as you can. Just remember, this is a revision resource that you're making. Okay, so stanza 3. The decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one. So, what's happened here is stanzas 1 and 2 really focused on what her mother's life was like before she had children, and the sort of the glamour and the excitement of that. And now, for the last half of the poem, we've got the introduction of this child, Carol Ann Duffy, presumably, and what happens to this woman when she becomes a mother. I think there's a real sense in this poem. I think kind of the undercurrent of it is questioning how society treated women, or the expectations of women in the 1950s. So that there was sort of time to have fun, but as soon as you've got married, which was happening a lot younger than people tend to marry now, so you might get married at 19 and settle down and have children at that age. And the expectation really was that that would be your priority. You would be a mother and a wife, and it would be unlikely that you would go out to work. That wasn't the expectation, and so you go from kind of being young and having quite a lot of freedom to suddenly becoming quite restricted in terms of what you would do and how you would spend your time. So she says the decade ahead of me was the best one. Now I don't know if that's the mother's perspective. I don't think we ever really get her perspective. We just have how the child sees it, and so she guesses that the best 10 years of her mother's life may well have been before she was born. I think there's a sense of irritation at that, frustration maybe. She seems to recognise in this line that she was loud, that she was possessive, that maybe she was difficult as a child, needy, like demanding of her mother's time. But that possessiveness still goes through this whole poem, even though this is, written much later. Even in the title, Before You Were Mine, is a very possessive way to talk about her mom. Maybe that's a reflection on the kind of relationship that they had. Maybe she was difficult, and maybe she feels regretful about that now. I don't know. Continue to use that colloquial language in that A, like she's chatting to her. I think this is designed to show us that they've got a real closeness now, that she's able to just chat with her quite easily, quite informally, that they've got a good relationship. And she says, I remember my hands in those high-heeled red shoes. So even though all of this has been about kind of the things that happened before she was born, things that happened in the past, this is the first example of something that happened in the past that she actually could be remembering. This genuinely is a memory that she has, not the kind of omniscient narrator talking about the things that happened before she was born. So what she's done is she's found her mother's high-heeled shoes as a child, and she's put her hands in the shoes and walked them around. Maybe sort of that playing at recognising something in her mother that she wanted to emulate. Maybe it's just childish playing. I don't know. But I think there's something interesting about the high-heeled red shoes. I think they're symbolic. I think this is an example of symbolism, because a high-heeled red shoe isn't, but they're not mom shoes, whatever such a thing is. But in the 1950s, there would have been an expectation, like she was glamorous, she was Marilyn Monroe, she wore red shoes, red heels, and polka dot dresses, and all of those kind of things. And yet now those things wouldn't be fitting of the mom. Like, that's not how her mom dresses or how her mom behaves. And so they're described as being a relic, an object that survives from an earlier time. These might be, relics are in museums and stuff. This is something to look back on and remember. I think she's telling us that those are things that are no longer fitting for her mother, something that wouldn't be worn, something's like so far from the past, so far removed from the person that she becomes, that it's almost like a relic, something that should be kept in a museum, something, from the past to be remembered. So she's clearly made a massive change from that Marilyn Monroe figure in stanza 1 to the mom that she is, the mom that she was. Your ghost clatters towards me over George Square. So she refers to her mom as a ghost. Now, in the context, at the start of last lesson, we looked at the fact that her mom dies 10 years after this poem's been written. So the ghost becomes a metaphorical ghost, not a real ghost. Not a real ghost, like ghosts are a thing. I don't believe in ghosts, you might. Metaphorical ghost in the sense that it represents the death of her youth, the death of that Marilyn Monroe figure, the death of that glamour that she had and that beauty, and that she was so iconic. That's what's died. But again, we're switching back into this weird thing where she's able to see her mom clattering towards her over George Square. George Square is a place in Scotland. I think this is a poem full of those little specific details that really make me feel that it is autobiographical, because the reference to her specific friends, her mom's specific friends, and then this specific place, and there's another one in the next stanza, really makes me feel that this is about her life and this is a deeply personal one. I think the verb clatters is interesting. It consolidates none of these things are just photographs, which you could fall foul into thinking they are because they're things from before she was born. But I think clatter seems to lack an elegance, seems to be clunky and noisy, and maybe that's because that person's died. So if her mum were to wear them now, she would clatter, she wouldn't be able to move as gracefully or elegantly. Or maybe she was losing it when she became a mother. I don't know. Till I see you, clear as scent under the tree with its lights. So clear as scent is something called synesthesia. And it's how synesthesia is where we mix up the senses. So for example, I used to know somebody who used to say to me, don't look at me with that tone of voice. Now, that doesn't really make sense, but you can understand what they're trying to convey. You can get what they're meaning. Now, in this sense, she's talking about a smell. Now, I think there is sort of research into the fact that smells are the most, or the sense that most quickly conveys or triggers memories. So there's something to do with where the bit of our brain that processes smell is closer to the bit of our brain with memory. I might be making all of this up. I am usually very good at my scientific knowledge. It is possible that this is all nonsense. But anyway, what she's saying is almost like that glamorous person had a smell, and that she can smell it. She can smell what her mom used to smell like. She can smell the nice perfume that she would have worn when she was dressing up, and that's triggering these thoughts and these memories, even though in this sense they're not real memories. because she's narrating about things that happened before she was born. And then there's this sort of weird bit. There's a couple of weird bits in this poem, but I think this is one of them. And whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart? So her mom has got love bites, and this is sort of in the 1950s. This would be quite a shocking thing, not like fall off your chair shocking, but like it's like it's sexual behaviour, it's provocative behaviour, it's a behaviour that we wouldn't expect of a young woman, and therefore we're building on that idea of the rebellious figure that her mother was. If you remember, she used to stay out late and she didn't care that she had to get a hiding for doing it. Like she just wasn't bothered. She was just rebellious and she wasn't going to do as she was told. I think there's something really interesting about this idea of her being quite a rebellious, provocative sort of figure as a youth, and then becoming a mom and losing all of those things, and becoming, what a typical mom, that she's lost all those qualities. And I think that's what this poem's part of what this poem's focusing on. I think the sweetheart's weird. I think we almost have a sense that she's switched roles with her mom, and she's talking to her mom like she were her child. So there's some role reversal going on here, maybe. Okay, final stanza. Chat, chat, chat. I hate that bit. I like this poem, but I hate that bit. I don't know why. It's to introduce the idea of the dance. It's onomatopoeic. You'd teach me the steps on the way home. I think this is included to use the idea of dance as a link between the Marilyn mom and the mom that she becomes, the glamorous woman that she was, and the mother that she becomes. There's a link between them. Some of the person that she was is still there. Maybe it's just repressed. Maybe she just has to fight it. Maybe there's no place in this society for women to be the way she was when she was younger. You just grow up and you settle down and you have a family, and that's just what you do. But there's a sense that she still has some of that glamour and fun that she had when she was younger. It's still there. But that's really, really juxtaposed with the fact that they were dancing on the way back from Mass. So Mass is like a Catholic service. And there's a real contrast also between that sexualised behaviour that we've seen earlier and religion. Catholics believe in no sex before marriage, and there's a subtle suggestion that wasn't the way her mum lived a younger life. So we're not told that explicitly, but I think that's suggested that she did have a rebellious and free life before she settled down. And so there's a contrast between the love bites at the end of stanza 3 and the Mass at the start of stanza 4, showing maybe that she's grown up, she's just doing the things that she's supposed to do, and not having the same fun that she did when she was younger. She's stamping stars from the wrong pavement. I always think stamping stars potentially is a link to the Hollywood Hall of Fame. There's those celebrities who've all got like a star with their name on. Maybe it's linked to that. Maybe that was the potential that she had. Like as she was referenced to being like Marilyn Monroe. Maybe the potential that she had was she could have gone on to be famous. She could have been a celebrity. She could have been a Hollywood star. But instead, she stayed in Scotland and had a child. And maybe Caroline Duffy feels a guilt. Maybe she feels that she stopped her mum from living the life that she could have had. Maybe she could have had this amazing life and she stopped her from having it. I think wrong pavement, the adjective wrong. Does she think her mum made the wrong choice? Was having the child the wrong thing? Is that what Caroline Duffy thinks about her mother's life? She shouldn't have had her. It's a really weird concept that she wouldn't exist if her mum hadn't had the child, but she's still saying, was it wrong? Was it the wrong thing for her to have done? Was it the wrong choice for her to have made in her life? So there's an interesting idea in there. Even then, I wanted the bold girl winking in Portobello, somewhere in Scotland before I was born. Portobello is another place in Scotland. Again, it's these specific little details that have given us this sense that this is really a personal piece. a personal poem written about Caroline Duffy to her mom, or about her mom. That glamorous love lasts. So I think the glamour links back to Marilyn Monroe. Maybe she's telling us that even though she knows that her mom lived in a society that tried to repress women, that might be getting a bit feminist, I'm not sure. A society that, I think 1950s was a repressive time. There were expectations of how women would behave, and most women just felt they had to do that, behave in that way, live in that way. Maybe she's telling us that that glamour that she had does actually last. It is still there. It's always in you. Maybe like with the dance, you know, there's this little thread that remains. A little bit of that person that she was is still there, and it does last. Where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you're mine. There's a use of polysyndeton there. So polysyndeton is where we use the word and repeatedly. So technically, like grammatically, we would expect it to go sparkle, comma, waltz, and laugh, but instead it doesn't. I think this just emphasises each of the verbs. It's just emphasising there her qualities. She sparkles like a star. She waltzes because she's the dancing, and then the laugh, bringing back to that beginning bit, you know, that first stanza where she was in absolute hysterics in the street. And that in some way, all of those qualities that she had are still there. They last because they're so inherently part of who her mother was. They're still there, but maybe they're just a little bit harder to see. All the verbs are really positive, and they highlight the change. You know, they're emphasising that she had those qualities before, and that maybe that a lot of those were lost, or at least, you know, lessened after having a child. And maybe this is just a sense that she can recognise that her mum is still brilliant and still wonderful and still has all those qualities, but maybe they're just a little bit harder to find. Structure. Now, remember, when we write about structure, we're never going to write just about structure. It's incredibly difficult to get into the highest levels with poetry by talking just about structure, but we might link it to a particular part of the poem or particular idea that we're trying to emphasise. And this might be part of our development. You know, we're trying to add as many possible comments on the effect as possible, and structure might be one of the things that come in near the end. We do know that candidates that want to get full marks need to reference structure. So we're going to talk about it, but in some poems it's going to be more significant than others. In this poem, I don't think it's a hugely significant part of the poem. It's quite neat, so 4 stanzas of 5 lines, quite ordered, and it enhanced. And that order sort of enhanced by the fact that each stanza ends with a question mark or a full stop. We've got complete utterances packed into those sentences, and everything seems to be contained into quite a neat, controlled sort of way. There's a division halfway through between a life before the child and afterwards, and that's a structural point that we could talk about as well. And we also might say that this kind of structure, this perfect form, could be linking to that idea that people have that this is triggered from photographs. That these are just, she's seen photographs and she's crafting the memories around those, and the kind of the order and the conciseness might be mirroring a photograph. Okay, last thing, thinking task. We need to remember that none of these poems will ever be written about on their own. So we study them individually, and then as we've done a fair few, when we get through a fair few, then we start to look at how we can make links between them. I think we need to try and remember that they are never written about independently. We'll never just write about Before Your Mind. So we need to try and think about connections we can make with other poems. And so this is a useful place to sort of start thinking. So what links could you make between Before Your Mind and Walking Away? Could you compare any ideas? Could you compare any of the language? And then similarly, what links could you make between Before Your Mind and Mother Any Distance? How would you compare the ideas? What about the language? So for example, if I was going to compare Before Your Mind and Mother Any Distance, I might say that they're both about the relationship with mothers. Both focus on the mother, that's the parent that's focused on. But from the perspective of a son in one, a daughter in the other. I could also talk about the fact that Before Your Mind focuses a lot on the past and memories, whereas Mother Any Distance focuses on a single moment, that particular moment of him leaving home. So So that's the kind of links you might try and make.